You are interested in the unusual, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
We've been horrified by child sex abuse scandals in this country, tragically over and over again. But new disclosures in the story of the late Jimmy Savile, an eccentric, flamboyant British entertainment superstar, defy imagination, with hundreds of victims already identified and now even more disturbing allegations coming to light. We get details from London and Al Jazeera's Jennifer Glass.
He was buried like a national hero. Jimmy Savile's lavish three-day memorial, a reflection of the stardom he'd enjoyed over a 60-year career. Thousands of fans lined up to pay tribute. His trademark cigar next to his golden coffin. A military honor guard of British Royal Marines carried him to his funeral. For years, he was one of the BBC's biggest stars on television and radio. His Saturday night show, Jim'll Fix It, encouraged children to write in with wishes that Jimmy would fulfill, like the girl who wanted a reindeer for Christmas. The audiences were huge.
Do you know how many people are watching you just now? Have you got any idea how many people? There's 20 million people watching you just now.
But soon after Savile died, allegations emerged that he had been sexually abusing children for decades. The adoration replaced with shock and disgust. Calls started pouring in at the country's main abuse hotline. So far, they've received 400 about Jimmy Savile alone.
We suspect that's probably just the tip of an iceberg, though. So the latest Metropolitan Police estimate from London is that probably Jimmy Savile has abused something like 1,500 individuals over a number of decades.
It's only now that Savile's exploits have become public that many victims feel comfortable coming forward, some after more than 40 years.
We deal with a number of people who have abused over a large period of time, but I have to say Savile beats all of them. He is probably the most prolific offender that we've come across.
The Jimmy Savile allegations seem to have opened the floodgates of abuse claims from that era, and many of his showbiz contemporaries have ended up here in court. Like Rolf Harris, a veteran entertainer and artist accused of 12 counts of indecent assault. And just yesterday, 70s British glam rock star Gary Glitter was charged with 8 offenses connected to girls between the ages of 12 and 14. A wide-ranging police investigation was launched after the Savile claims, involving several celebrities at that time. Some have been acquitted. But they all pale in comparison to Jimmy Savile, a pedophile hiding in plain sight. Former television executive Stuart Purvis worked at the BBC and remembers when Savile was there.
Well, Jimmy Savile's in the building, and because he dressed in this very kind of distinctive way, it was like a kind of royal visit when he came.
Savile hobnobbed with royalty, prime ministers, even the Pope. At the time, he seemed untouchable. For these kids, an audience with the country's top politician.
Hello, welcome. Come in.
Then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher gave Savile a prominent role at the country's biggest psychiatric hospital. The entertainer was a prolific campaigner and fundraiser. He brought in millions over the years. That gave him free run in many institutions, like the Stoke Mandeville Hospital, 35 miles outside of London. Savile even persuaded Prince Charles and Princess Diana to open a new ward. Savile also had his own room, so he could stay the night. In a side of the Times, a police detective in the late 1970s did raise the question whether Jimmy Savile was abusing young girls here. But his concerns were dismissed because it was Jimmy Savile.
He actually raised a hell of a lot of money for good causes. And, the threat, I suppose, into the people who ran those good causes was, well, if we cut off a link with Jimmy Savile, we're cutting off a flow of money.
The police investigation into the scope of Jimmy Savile's crimes continues, and the BBC is holding its own internal review. That report is due out soon.
I think people inside the BBC are pretty fearful of what it's going to say, because clearly they stand accused of allowing this to happen on their premises. I guess their defence is going to be, well, we weren't the only people, it happened on other people's premises as well, so there was a culture of the times.
A culture that's just now, finally, coming to light. Jennifer Glass, Al Jazeera, London.
And joining us now to talk more about the Savile scandal and its impact on Britain is John Bird from the National Association of People Abused in Childhood in the UK. We appreciate your being with us, Mr. Bird, to talk about this. Your organization is the one that hundreds of people reported to within a matter of weeks after the first reports were disclosed here publicly in the UK. It's hard to get our heads around this idea that there could be as many as 1,500 victims.
Well, he was a lifetime perpetrator of serial sexual abuse against children, the very nastiest kind. And yes, it's going way back to the late 1950s when he started, so the best part of half a century. And, you know, sometimes he would boast to other people, look, we've heard him boasting, he'd already abused three young people before going to work in the morning. So, you know, we believe it's a lot higher than 1,500 people who were abused, but most will never talk about it.
And this is horrific. And other names have come to the surface. Just the latest, Gary Glitter, certainly a very flamboyant figure in his own right as well.
That's
is there
right.
a sense this was an organized ring of abusers?
There seems to be suggestions that there was contact between them. We've heard people who were raped as children within paedophile rings saying that Jimmy Savile and other people who are being abused now were celebrity guests amongst other, you know, not so famous paedophiles. It is truly shocking. Some of the accounts that we've heard on our support line are really just beyond imagination.
And now when we hear that the investigation into all this is exposing links to the BBC and what the BBC might have done, I mean, this is one of the most respected news and documentary organizations in the world, but there are indications that things were known and helped to cover up through the BBC.
Well, yes, that inquiry by Dame Janet Smith, a very, very experienced and respected senior lawyer, looking into all the evidence that she can gather, including evidence from people who were children and abused at the time. They've got to, you know, produce a report that's due soon. There may be things that, you know, the BBC will have to, you know, hold their hands up and say, yes, we were guilty in that. There should have been more safeguarding of children in place at the time. There may be things that, you know, they should have known, that warnings were given and not acted on. And we have to wait and see what the content of that report will be. But certainly mistakes were made. There should have been more protection of children.
And certainly it is not, this sort of perversion is not confined to the UK. After all, in the States we have seen many cases of this as well. But what was it, do you think, that allowed in British culture for this to go on for decades and evade a real public disclosure?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, it is across all cultures in the world, always has been, we believe. There are some people who are a danger to children, but how it was kept quiet, we think it's partly sort of intimidation. He was quite, you know, he was connected to gangland culture. He was quite a sort of, you know, powerful man. He'd been a wrestler in his younger days. He'd been a coal miner. He was strong. He was, you know, from other adults who worked with him were quite intimidated by him. And that may be part of it. He was also very wealthy. There have been allegations made by police officers that reports were made, I think back in the 1970s, that he'd raped 2 children. He paid off the parents. So, you know, there are many different things that seem to have enabled him to get away with it. And he said before he died in a very famous interview with a psychologist that he could get away with whatever he wanted, and he was unusual in that way. Money, power, influence, you know, celebrity got him a long way. You know, he met the Pope, he met the Queen. It's astonishing what he got away with.
Truly shocking, and it is certainly an international crisis. John Bird from the National Association of People Abused in Childhood, appreciate your being with us.
Thank you.
In the UK, a program aimed at catching celebrity sex offenders is now under criticism following a series of high-profile cases. Phil Ittner explains.
The much-loved soap star Bill Roache left a British courtroom a free man this week after a jury acquitted him of multiple charges of sexual assault dating from decades ago. There is now a very public debate about a series of celebrity sexual abuse cases. Roach is the third not guilty verdict out of many cases that the British police have brought to court as a result of a widespread investigation called Operation U-Tree. Launched in 2012 following the revelations that the deceased British TV star Jimmy Savile allegedly assaulted hundreds of children for years, shocking the nation. The eccentric DJ was beloved by many, even knighted by the Queen. Sociology professor Frank Ferruti wrote a book on the Savile cases and says the police investigating a select group, celebrities, under the auspices of hunting down sex offenders is nothing short of a witch hunt.
Policing is really shifting in a new area where it's looking for crimes that have not been reported. It's looking for criminals that have not been detected.
The Savile cases which sparked all this were reported for years, but police and Savile's employer, the BBC, never followed through with them. Further complicating matters is the passage of time and fading memories. But as UK barrister Gary points out, unlike America, Britain has no statute of limitations on crimes of this nature and says sex offenders should face justice no matter how long ago they assaulted their victims.
I think for many people it is quite hard to get to grips with allegations from so many years ago. To think about where was I in 1974 is quite tough. The only way I can explain it to you is if you were in a bedroom being abused, you might remember more than whether you were playing football or going swimming.
The BBC is now paying out compensation, over $6 million already, to victims of the Savile cases who reportedly endured assaults, the youngest just 5 years old at the time. Scotland Yard also says Operation U-Tree has more evidence and cases against some very high-profile stars who have abused their status for years. The revelations that Sir Jimmy Savile got away with abusing children for years and died a free man spurred Britain's police into action. The concern now is how to balance justice, both for those legitimate victims and for those public figures falsely accused. Phil Ittner, Al Jazeera, London.
What?